Section 21, Part 1, Chapter 4, continued, of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, by Vicente Blasco Ibáñez. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. There was a long silence. Julius von Hartrott appeared lost in reverie. The very thought of the accumulated strength of his race submerged him in a species of mystic adoration. "The preliminary victory," he suddenly exclaimed, "we gained some time ago. Our enemies, therefore, hate us, and yet they imitate us. All that bears the stamp of Germany is in demand throughout the world. The very countries that are trying to resist our arms copy our methods in their universities and admire our theories, even those which do not attain success in Germany. Oftentimes we laugh among ourselves, like the Roman augurs, upon seeing the servility with which they follow us, and yet they will not admit our superiority." For the first time, Argensola's eyes and general expression approved the words of Hartrott. What he had just said was only too true. The world was a victim of the German superstition, an intellectual cowardice. The fear of force had made it admire en masse and indiscriminately everything of Teutonic origin, just because of the intensity of its glitter. Gold mixed with talcum. The so-called Latins, dazed with admiration, were with unreasonable pessimism becoming doubtful of their ability, and thus were the first to decree their own death. And the conceited Germans merely had to repeat the words of these pessimists in order to strengthen their belief in their own superiority. With that southern temperament which leaps rapidly from one extreme to another, many Latins had proclaimed that in the world of the future there would be no place for the Latin peoples, now in their death agony, adding that Germany alone preserved the latent forces of civilization. The French, who declaimed among themselves with the greatest exaggeration, unconscious that folks were listening the other side of the door, had proclaimed repeatedly for many years past that France was degenerating rapidly and would soon vanish from the earth. Then why should they resent the scorn of their enemies? Why shouldn't the Germans share their beliefs? The professor, misinterpreting the silent agreement of the Spaniard, who until then had been listening with such a hostile smile, added, "Now is the time to try out in France the German culture, implanting it there as conquerors." Here Argensola interrupted. "And what if there is no such thing as German culture, as a celebrated Teuton says?" It had become necessary to contradict this pedant, who had become insufferable with his egotism. Hartrott almost jumped from his chair on hearing such a doubt. "What German is that?" "Nietzsche." The professor looked at him pityingly. Nietzsche had said to mankind, "Be harsh," affirming that a righteous war sanctifies every cause. He had exalted Bismarck. He had taken part in the War of '70. He was glorifying Germany when he spoke of the smiling lion and the blonde beast. But Argensola listened with the tranquility of one sure of his ground. Oh, hours of placid reading near the studio chimney, listening to the rain beating against the pane. The philosopher did say that, he admitted, and he said many other very different things, like all great thinkers. His doctrine is one of pride, but of individual pride, not that of a nation or race. He always spoke against the insidious fallacy of race. Argensola recalled his philosophy word for word. Culture, according to Nietzsche, was unity of style in all the manifestations of life. Science did not necessarily include culture. Great knowledge might be accompanied by great barbarity, by the absence of style, or by the chaotic confusion of all styles. Germany, according to the philosopher, had no genuine culture owing to its lack of style. The French, he had said, were at the head of an authentic and fruitful culture, whatever their valor might be, and until now everybody had drawn upon it. Their hatreds were concentrated within their own country. "I cannot endure Germany. The spirit of servility and pettiness penetrates everywhere." I believe only in French culture, and what the rest of Europe calls culture appears to me to be a mistake. The few individual cases of lofty culture that I met in Germany were of French origin. You know," continued Argensola, "that in quarreling with Wagner about the excess of Germanism in his art, Nietzsche proclaimed the necessity of Mediterraneanizing music. His ideal was a culture for all Europe, but with a Latin base." Julius von Hartrott replied most disdainfully to this, repeating the Spaniard's very words. Men who thought much said many things. Besides, Nietzsche was a poet, completely demented at his death, and was no authority among the university sages. His fame had only been recognized in foreign lands, and he paid no further attention to the youth, ignoring him as though he had evaporated into thin air after his presumption. All the professor's attention was now concentrated on Desnoyers. "This country," he resumed, "is dying from within. How can you doubt that revolution will break out the minute war is declared? Have you not noticed the agitation of the boulevard on account of the Caillaux trial? Reactionaries and revolutionists have been assaulting each other for the past 3 days. I have seen them challenging one another with shouts and songs as if they were going to come to blows right in the middle of the street. This division of opinion will become accentuated when our troops cross the frontier. It will then be civil war. The anti-militarists are clamoring mournfully, believing that it is in the power of the government to prevent the clash. A country degenerated by democracy and by the inferiority of the triumphant Celt, greedy for full liberty. We are the only free people on earth because we know how to obey." This paradox made Julio smile. Germany, the only free people. "It is so," persisted Hartrott energetically. "We have the liberty best suited to a great people, economical and intellectual liberty. And political liberty?" The professor received this question with a scornful shrug. "Political liberty! Only decadent and ungovernable people, inferior races, anxious for equality and democratic confusion, talk about political liberty. We Germans do not need it. We are a nation of masters who recognize the sacredness of government, and we wish to be commanded by those of superior birth. We possess the genius of organization." That, according to the doctor, was the grand German secret, and the Teutonic race, upon taking possession of the world, would share its discovery with all. The nations would then be so organized that each individual would give the maximum of service to society. Humanity, banded in regiments for every class of production, obeying a superior officer, like machines contributing to the greatest possible output of labor. There you have the perfect state. Liberty was a purely negative idea, if not accompanied with a positive concept which would make it useful. The two friends listened with astonishment to this description of the future which Teutonic superiority was offering to the world. Every individual submitted to intensive production, the same as a bit of land from which its owner wishes to get the greatest number of vegetables. Mankind reduced to mechanics, no useless operations that would not produce immediate results. And the people who heralded this awful idea were the very philosophers and idealists who had once given contemplation and reflection the first place in their existence. Hartrott again harked back to the inferiority of their racial enemies. In order to combat successfully, it required self-assurance, an unquenchable confidence in the superiority of their own powers. At this very hour in Berlin, everyone is accepting war. Everyone is believing that victory is sure, while here, I do not say that the French are afraid. They have a brave past that galvanizes them at certain times, but they are so depressed that it is easy to guess that they will make almost any sacrifices in order to evade what is coming upon them. The people first will shout with enthusiasm, as it always cheers that which carries it to perdition. The upper classes have no faith in the future. They are keeping quiet, but the presentiment of disaster may easily be conjectured. Yesterday I was talking with your father. He is French and he is rich. He was indignant against the government of his country for involving the nation in the European conflict in order to defend a distant and uninteresting people. He complains of the exalted patriots who have opened the abyss between Germany and France, preventing a reconciliation. He says that Alsace and Lorraine are not worth what a war would cost in men and money. He recognizes our greatness and is convinced that we have progressed so rapidly that the other countries cannot come up to us. And as your father thinks, so do many others. All those who are wrapped in creature comfort and fear to lose it. Believe me, a country that hesitates and fears war is conquered before the first battle." Julio evinced a certain disquietude, as though he would like to cut short the conversation. "Just leave my father out of it. He speaks that way today because war is not yet an accomplished fact, and he has to contradict and vent his indignation on whoever comes near him. Tomorrow he will say just the opposite. My father is a Latin." The professor looked at his watch. He must go. There were still many things which he had to do before going to the station. The Germans living in Paris had fled in great bands, as though a secret order had been circulating among them. That afternoon, the last of those who had been living ostensibly in the capital would depart. "I have come to see you because of our family interest, because it was my duty to give you fair warning. You are a foreigner, and nothing holds you here. If you are desirous of witnessing a great historic event, remain. But it will be better for you to go. The war is going to be ruthless, very ruthless, and if Paris attempts resistance as formerly, we shall see terrible things. Modes of offense have greatly changed." Desnoyers made a gesture of indifference. "The same as your father," observed the professor. "Last night he and all your family responded in the same way. Even my mother prefers to remain with her sister, saying that the Germans are very good, very civilized, and there is nothing to apprehend in their triumph." This good opinion seemed to be troubling the doctor. "They don't understand what modern warfare means. They ignore the fact that our generals have studied the art of overcoming the enemy, and they will apply it mercilessly. Ruthlessness is the only means, since it perturbs the intelligence of the enemy, paralyzes his action, and pulverizes his resistance. The more ferocious the war, the more quickly it is concluded. To punish with cruelty is to proceed humanely. Therefore, Germany is going to be cruel, with a cruelty hitherto unseen, in order that the conflict may not be prolonged." He had risen and was standing, cane and straw hat in hand. Argensola was looking at him with frank hostility. The professor, obliged to pass near him, did so with a stiff and disdainful nod. Then he started toward the door, accompanied by his cousin. The farewell was brief. "I repeat my counsel. If you do not like danger, go. It may be that I am mistaken, and that this nation, convinced of the uselessness of defense, may give itself up voluntarily. At any rate, we shall soon see. I shall take great pleasure in returning to Paris when the flag of the Empire is floating over the Eiffel Tower. A mere matter of 3 or 4 weeks, certainly by the beginning of September." France was going to disappear from the map. To the doctor, her death was a foregone conclusion. "Paris will remain," he admitted benevolently. "The French will remain because a nation is not easily suppressed. But they will not retain their former place. We shall govern the world. They will continue to occupy themselves in inventing fashions, in making life agreeable for visiting foreigners, and in the intellectual world we shall encourage them to educate good actresses, to produce entertaining novels, and to write witty comedies. Nothing more." Desnoyers laughed as he shook his cousin's hand, pretending to take his words as a paradox. "I mean it," insisted Hartrott. "The last hour of the French Republic as an important nation has sounded. I have studied it at close range, and it deserves no better fate. License and lack of confidence above, sterile enthusiasm below." Upon turning his head, he again caught Argensola's malicious smile. "We know all about that kind of study," he added aggressively. "We are accustomed to examine the nations of the past, to dissect them fiber by fiber, so that we recognize at a glance the psychology of the living." The Bohemian fancied that he saw a surgeon talking self-sufficiently about the mysteries of the will before a corpse. What did this pedantic interpreter of dead documents know about life? When the door closed, he approached his friend, who was returning somewhat dismayed. Argensola no longer considered Dr. Julius von Hartrott crazy. "What a brute!" he exclaimed, throwing up his hands. "And to think that they are at large, these originators of gloomy errors! Who would ever believe that they belonged to the same land that produced Kant, the pacifist, the serene Goethe and Beethoven? To think that for so many years we have believed that they were forming a nation of dreamers and philosophers, occupied in working disinterestedly for all mankind." The sentence of a German geographer recurred to him: "The German is bicephalous. With one head he dreams and poetizes, while with the other he thinks and executes." Desnoyers was now beginning to feel depressed at the certainty of war. This professor seemed to him even worse than the Herr Counsellor and the other Germans that he had met on the steamer. His distress was not only because of his selfish thought as to how the catastrophe was going to affect his plans with Marguerite. He was suddenly discovering that in this hour of uncertainty he loved France. He recognized it as his father's native land and the scene of the great revolution. Although he had never mixed in political campaigns, he was a Republican at heart, and had often ridiculed certain of his friends who adored kings and emperors, thinking it a great sign of distinction. Argensola tried to cheer him up. "Who knows? This is a country of surprises. One must see the Frenchman when he tries to remedy his want of foresight. Let that barbarian of a cousin of yours say what he will, there is order, there is enthusiasm. Worse off than we were those who lived in the days before Valmy, entirely disorganized, their only defense battalions of laborers and countrymen handling a gun for the first time. But nevertheless, the Europe of the old monarchies could not for 20 years free themselves from these improvised warriors." End of Section 21. Recording by Tony Oliva, Albuquerque, New Mexico.